Hello and welcome to another A Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm talking to you today about something that's been in the news. You probably would have heard about it, and it's the fact that the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, has died, head of state for the UK and 14 Commonwealth countries. And I thought I'd do a bit of a stream of consciousness really on what I think about that and the royal family in general as an institution, in terms of a little bit of maybe philosophy, I guess psychology, and even economics, and to express what I feel. But bear with me, there hasn't been too much forethought going into this. So what is my position? Am I a monarchist, a royalist, or am I a Republican? And the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. I have come from a family that I suppose has pretty traditional values. My dad was in the Navy. Both my mum and dad were in the Navy, but when I was born, my dad was in the Navy. And we lived around the world. And as such, I was luckily enough, privileged enough, and that's something we'll talk about, to go to boarding school. And you would think that's a sort of the right context for me to become quite a traditionalist sort of person. But I've always been a bit of an iconoclast, always a little bit going against swimming against the currents, always been a bit of a liberal, stuck out in that way, I suppose, in that traditional context. And then, went to uni, far away from home. I've talked about this all in a podcast before, why I'm so different to my parents. An Only Sky podcast I did. So check that out. I'll put a link in the description. But basically, where my parents are fairly traditional, I'm pretty liberal. Where they're conservative, I'm liberal. And as I've got older, my politics have moved to the left, broadly in line with doing more and more philosophy. And I think there's an interesting discussion in that, which is, are philosophers more liberal than conservative? And I would argue they are, because actually if you follow the evidence and build up your rationale and your rational skills, then I think you should probably drift to the left. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a while. So I've always been a little bit on the liberal side, much more so now. But I've never given too much thought to the royal family, because really, even though we were in a forces, family household, and we moved around, and there was, your traditional conservative kind of private school and boarding school and all that kind of rubbish, royal family's never really been a big thing, never a big thought in my life. I was upset when Princess Di died, but I think that was more to do with national hysteria. When I look back on it now, really the royal family is a bit like meh to me. And that's and what I've got to remember now is that Queen Elizabeth means a lot to an awful lot of people, right? And the institution of royal family means a lot to an awful lot of people. So I'm not going to come on and go right now and go, it's all a load of rubbish, because there are sentiments to take into account of other people. That's empathy, right? But on the other hand, I'm no huge Republican and no huge monarchist. As I said, I'm somewhere in the middle, and I have felt a bit meh about Elizabeth passing away, Queen Elizabeth. So I kind of like trying to work out what I feel, and I guess I've gradually moved towards a Republican sort of position based on my understanding of democracy and of human equality over time, and just the understanding that to be born into privilege is a hard thing to justify rationally, and to maintain that privilege, because there's no merit involved in that. You are just born into it's a complete luck of where you're born and when you're born and which family you're born into. And understanding that, you kind of, it's a leveler, it's a great leveler, that. So the idea of privilege is is a problem. I've written on this before as well in terms of inheritance tax. So I remember writing a piece saying inheritance tax is a good thing, right? It's just bad if it affects you personally, but if you're looking at the big picture, then if someone inherits £2 million on account of them being luckily born to this set of parents, then that is giving them an unfair leg up in society. Unfair in terms of they didn't merit it, they did nothing to deserve that or work hard for that, they were just born into that family. And actually that's like effectively going out onto the road and picking a kid and going, here's 2 million quid. What have I done to deserve that? Nothing. It's just, here's 2 million quid. It's just like winning the lottery. It's a natural lottery, as the philosopher John Rawls might say. But there's no merit involved. There's no just desserts for that money. So that is privilege, and you can see that is obviously a really prevalent idea with the royal family, where people are born into a huge amount of money, a huge amount of power, one thing I liked about Prince Harry is when he gave some talks at the Obama Foundation several years ago, he recognised this. He's like, I'm incredibly lucky. I've been born into this family with this money and power and privilege. But the great thing is he recognised that and said, so what can I best do with that? And so for him, it was, once you've got everything, it's a bit like Bill Gates. Gets to a point where you're like, okay, I've got all this. You could either be like a Trump who's after money and narcissistic, or you can think, right, I want to do as much as I can that's a benefit to the world now. I've achieved. I'm at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. I'm having introspection. I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, what is there for me to do now? Well, let's set these goals of making the world a better place, and I'm going to put that money towards these really beneficial ideas for the world. And I think Harry had that, Prince Harry, and he really understood that, and I was really impressed with what he said, and that's why I'm more of a supporter of Harry than any of the other members of the royal family, because he gets that, which is that sustaining privilege is, and that's how inheritance tax comes along and says, right, you're going to die. You've generated that income out of society, right, and that money. So we're gonna take that back and we're gonna redistribute it to try and ideally you'd ring fence inheritance tax to use it for redistribution of wealth to of that money to help improve the quality of opportunity. We're going to put that into schemes that enable less privileged people, less fortunate people, to have the same access to opportunity that people who have loads of money do. And so that's what I think about that. And I think I look at the Conservative Party in Britain, and I think most of their policies appear to be traditional policies that look to sustain privilege, and that I favour politics that doesn't sustain privilege, because it's not warranted, it's not justified. And that's probably why I've been drifting away from the royal family as an institution for a few years, because it's recognising that it is just a whole institution based on privilege. And this then gets onto notions, and I wrote an article once on deference. I think I remember sort of 12 years ago when David Cameron was in charge, thinking if I ever met Cameron, I wouldn't show him any deference. Not because I'm not a Tory, but just because you're Prime Minister. I just started thinking about, well, just because you're Prime Minister, you don't deserve me to treat you as a superior human being to who I am, right? Why should I show you undue deference just because of who you are? Now, okay, I understand in institutions like the army or the navy or whatever, you are going to need to have hierarchies of authority that demand deference, and you have that because it builds unity and builds respect in a way that is absolutely necessary for the armed forces to function. So there are certain scenarios where deference is a necessary component of effectiveness. Okay, and yeah, so let's put that to the side. But in terms of just humans, like, I'd shake David Cameron by the hand as much as I'd shake the guy that's just cut down half my tree out the front, and anyone that I meet. Do you know what I mean? Like, we are all equal human beings, and that's that. And so with the Queen, like, I start thinking about, well, why should I say these things and bow in these ways and do these things that give you deference when you are just another human being who is just merely lucky to be born into that situation? So that's a big component of how I evaluate, well, everything, but the royal family here, which is to say you don't necessarily deserve what you have. But then the other side of me thinks in ways of consequentialist morality, which is to say, you can have something that isn't necessarily great in order to achieve a greater end. So in this sense, in this context, it would be something like, well, the royal family are beneficial for our society to bring together a sense of national identity and unity, and for economic benefits. So for, we get an awful lot of tourism into London based on this kind of idea of these old school notions of Britain and what it is, which are essentially incorrect in some ways. But, if that's going to be good for our economy, then that's beneficial and it's not morally bad and blah, blah, blah. So that's on the other side. And then I think, well, I probably need to look at how much the royal family really costs us against how much income they bring in. And then can you measure some of that soft power and soft influence and stuff that the royal family does around the world, going and bringing people together and sorting out these sort of things, environmental things that Prince Charles, now King Charles, has been involved in, and the same with William and Harry. There's some great causes that they wouldn't be able to hold that sway and influence for a greater good if they weren't members of the royal family. So, there are these competing ideas, which is the kind of Republican side, which is all humans are equal and you don't deserve to have that privilege. And then this other argument, which is, well, you've got that privilege if you're going to use it for positive ends, and if it's going to benefit me and my society and this country, then keep it. And so that's why those two things are constantly fighting in me. And then I just end up being in the middle going, well, they don't seem a problem to me, so just let them get on with it. And if other people really appreciate them, then good stuff, and that's fab. And if people around the world look into the UK and see the figurehead of the royal family as being generally positive and something that they think is pretty cool to do with Britain, and very traditional and very, it's part of our national identity, and if that's a net good, then go for it, whatever. So that's kind of where I am. That's what I feel about the royal family. I am pretty she's a human being, and she's died, and that's sad. And she's a mother, a grandmother, and a great grandmother, and that's sad for all those people involved, obviously. Am I particularly distraught? No, I'm not. In the same way, I wouldn't be particularly distraught if any other human died who's not, close to and meaningful for me. Which the Queen isn't. So I'm sad to a certain degree, but then I'm a bit like, okay, right. And then I think kind of strategically, which is, okay, well, what would be the most beneficial member, head of the state that we could have? If we are going to maintain a monarchy, then it's probably not going to be Prince Charles, because he's 73, and even though he's got some good ideas, he's got an awful lot of woo and believes in homeopathy and all this kind of crazy stuff. So you're thinking Prince William's probably a better guy to modernise the royal family and bring it into the 21st century. And so really it should probably skip a generation, go to William. I actually prefer Harry, but there you go. And I know that's controversial with certainly my extended family. who, the whole press to do with Meghan Markle and Harry is just so divisive, and the institutional racism that is involved, the accusations of institutional racism within the wider, not necessarily the people of the royal family, but the aides and the people around it and the institution, is probably undoubtedly there. Undoubtedly, contradiction in terms. So yeah, I have mixed feelings over the royal family, and I guess if I was to start a nation afresh, right? If I was to invent the UK now, there wouldn't be a monarchy, because you can't justify power and privilege being passed down merely on account of birthright. It is not rationally sustainable, but we've got it. And if it's not doing harm, or if it's doing good, then let's keep it. So it's all about managing, evaluating how much good or bad the royal family represent, or do, or are. So that's where I'm at. But I think the interesting philosophical discussion that might come out of this, and somewhat psychological, is this idea of deference. Is should we accord people deference just because A, we're told to, and B, they somehow deserve it on account of when and where and to whom they were born? And the simple answer is no. So therefore, deference, we should just treat each other equally. Would society be a more boring place, a more homogenous place, if everyone was just the same? We didn't have these ups and downs and all people up there and down there and all that. There is a larger discussion to be had there. I've written an article on, and I don't know whether I've done a video on, the holy grail for me morally is equality of opportunity. If everyone has the equal opportunity to strive for and to achieve certain things, then that's what we should be aiming for. But the flip side of that is, as soon as, really, if you want to give everyone proper equality of opportunity, they need to have the same genetic blueprints, and they need to have the same environment, and that's what levels the playing field, which is to say everyone's the same. You'd have a society of homogenous entities who are essentially identical, and that's the only way to achieve equality of opportunity. And if that's a bad thing, then okay, we've got an issue, because this end of the spectrum is bad and that end of the spectrum is bad. So how do we manage that? How do we surely we should still strive for equality of opportunity, even if the attainment of it is actually problematic, because more equality of opportunity now is better than the amount of equality of opportunity we have, and the inequality of opportunity. Anyway, that's a larger debate, but it's similar to the kind of deference one. If do we want a society where everyone is just equal in deference, or do we want a society where we do give certain people deference, but then if they don't merit it, so yeah, all of these kind of ideas floating around in my head, because this is a problem when you become philosophically minded, is you start questioning everything and going really deep into everything, rather than just getting along and saying, oh, the Queen's died, oh, I'm really sad, oh, I love the royal family, tradition, yay, let's have a street party, and let's have this wonderful memorial for the Queen, and let's welcome in the next monarch, and oh, I love the monarchy. I just sit down and just question everything that's based on, because that's how my brain works. So that's what I've done. The end result is I am siding more towards republicanism, but I wouldn't say I'm anti-monarchy. I would just say that in order for them to be a sustainable institution, they need to certainly modernize and prove themselves to be useful for this nation, and for me, and for my society. Anyway, let me know what you think. I've sort of rattled through a bunch of ideas, didn't go too deeply into it. As I admit, I probably need to evaluate how much, certainly in economic terms, the royal family cost us, and how much they bring into the public coffers. because that will be a large part of the evaluation of whether they are an institution we should keep. That's not to say that everything is purely evaluated in monetary terms. There are obviously other benefits that you can't quantify in those ways, or negative aspects. But there you go. As ever, question everything. If you appreciate the stuff I do, please like and subscribe to the channel. And, if you are able, please give thanks or join and become a member. I'm trying to do more content for members. I have very little amount of content for them at the moment because that's a new thing I've just started, but I will be creating more content that's members only. Anyway, take care, toodle pips, and the Queen has died. Sorry to hear that. We'll see where it goes.